The first time Daniel heard the voicemail, he almost dropped his phone. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was his father's. He had listened to countless old recordings before, a sentimental habit he hadn't managed to kick since his father's death 5 years ago, but this one was new. The timestamp was recent and the words were strange. "Danny, you know what we promised. It's time to finish it. You need to come home." The message played in his head on a loop, every word scraping at the edges of his memories. Daniel replayed it 5 times in a row, wondering if it was some cruel prank. But that voice, the weary tone, the almost imperceptible cough, it was him. Without thinking, he drove to the house where he grew up. He hadn't been back since the funeral, preferring to keep a distance from the memories locked inside. As he parked in front of the old Victorian, the house looked different. It loomed larger, shadows gathering at the edges as dusk approached, like it was holding its breath. Inside, the air was heavy, filled with the stale scent of dust and forgotten time. He wandered through the rooms, pausing in the den where they used to gather as a family. His mother had moved away years ago, leaving everything as it was. Nothing seemed out of place, but the message wouldn't leave his mind. The forgotten promise, his father's plea. Daniel knew he had to find out more. Rummaging through the boxes in the attic, he found old family albums, records, and letters on that, but nothing that hinted at a promise. Just as he was about to give up, he came in
across the with his name on it, written in his father's precise handwriting. Inside, he found an old cassette tape and a note for Danny when it's time. Wavered as if written with the Trilline Dan. He borrowed an ancient cassette player from the attic's chaos and pressed play. His father's voice crackled to life again, more strained than in the voicemail. "Danny, if you're listening to this, it means I'm gone, and it's time you knew the truth about who we are." The tape played on, describing a place, an old cabin in the woods a couple of hours away, and instructions to find something his father had hidden there. It felt absurd, like some sick scavenger hunt, but Daniel was too far gone to stop now. The next morning, Daniel drove out to the cabin. Snow had started to fall, and the roads were empty, adding an eerie stillness to the journey. When he finally found the cabin, hidden amongst bare trees, it looked even older than he remembered, a relic of childhood camping trips. As he walked through the creaking door, something shifted in the corner of the room. A figure. Daniel froze. It was his uncle, Marcus, a man who Daniel hadn't seen since his father's funeral. Marcus looked frail, eyes hollow, as if he had been living there for years. He didn't seem surprised to see Daniel. "He called you too, didn't he?" Marcus whispered, his voice cracked and raw. Daniel's stomach twisted. Marcus told him he'd been waiting for the call for years, a call that brought back old ghosts. Marcus spoke of a secret their family had kept hidden. Their father had been involved in something dark, something tied to their family history. Daniel didn't want to believe him, but his uncle's trembling hands and the haunted look in his eyes told a different story. He led Daniel to a hatch in the floor, one that Daniel had never seen before. Beneath was a cellar, and the stench that wafted out was metallic and bitter. In the dim light of the cellar, Daniel saw what his father had hidden. A stack of journals, a few old artifacts, and a box. Inside the box was a ring, tarnished and blackened with age. Marcus turned to Daniel, his voice low. "It's the promise we made, Danny, to protect this, to keep it hidden, no matter the cost." Daniel picked up the ring and felt a shock run through his body, like an electric current that made his vision blur for a moment. That night, Daniel dreamt of his father. He was standing at the edge of the forest, the same forest surrounding the cabin. He spoke without moving his lips. "You have to end it, Danny, before it's too late." Daniel woke up in a cold sweat, the ring still in his hand. The next day, Marcus was gone. No sign of him anywhere in the cabin or the woods around it, like he had vanished into thin air. Daniel didn't know what to do. The voicemail, the cabin, the ring, everything felt like an elaborate nightmare. He returned home thinking he could just forget about it all. But that night, another voicemail came. His father's voice, weaker this time.
Danny, they're coming! You have to protect it! The next few days were a blur. Daniel started noticing things. A car parked outside his house, its engine running for hours. A figure in his peripheral vision that always disappeared when he turned his head. The ring seemed to pulse with energy whenever he touched it, and he felt a weight settle on him, as if something was watching, waiting. In the dead of night, Daniel woke up to the sound of footsteps downstairs. He grabbed the ring and crept towards the stairs, heart pounding. He saw shadows moving, voices whispering. His father's voice echoed in his head. You have to protect it, no matter the cost. As he stepped into the living room, he saw them, figures in dark cloaks, faces hidden. They were searching for the ring. In the chaos that followed, Daniel barely remembered what happened. He only knew that he ran with the ring clutched in his hand, out into the snow, into the woods, until his legs gave out and he collapsed. He woke up in the hospital, his mother by his side. She looked at him with eyes full of sorrow. There are things you were never supposed to know, Danny, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Your father tried to protect you from it, but some promises can't be broken. The truth came out in fragments, broken pieces that Daniel struggled to put together. His father had been part of something ancient, a society sworn to guard a secret that should never be uncovered. The ring was the key, a burden passed down through generations, and now it was his. The last voicemail came weeks later. Daniel had almost convinced himself that it was over. He played it with trembling hands, his father's voice barely a whisper now, almost drowned out by static. I'm sorry, Danny. I never wanted this for you, but you have to finish it. And then a word that made Daniel's blood run cold. I had heard only once before in his uncle's terrified whisper, Run! Daniel stared out the window, the snow falling softly outside, and he knew this was just the beginning. Story, it all started with a voicemail, the kind of thing you don't give a second thought to. Ethan was the first to notice. He sat in his small, cluttered apartment, eyes fixed on his laptop as he skimmed through a pile of assignments, the sound of rain tapping against his window. His phone buzzed softly on the table, showing a missed call from his own number. An identical call came in from his own number, as if it had looped back in some bizarre way. He frowned, picking it up. He assumed it was a prank or a strange telemarketer trick. Still, curiosity got the best of him, and he hit play on the voicemail. Ethan, don't leave the office after 6 tonight. Stay inside no matter what happens. It wasn't just the fact that it was his own voice. It was the tone. Terrified, shaky, pleading. The sort of fear that seemed to spill right through the phone and settle in his bones. Goosebumps rose along his arms. He called Jake immediately. Jake laughed it off, sprawled on his worn-out couch in his too-cramped living room, twirling a pen. Ethan, come on, man. It's probably some weird scam. They clone your number all the time now. You sound freaked out. But even as he said it, his own phone buzzed on the coffee table in front of him, his own number flashing on the screen. He swallowed, shooting Ethan a glance that spoke volumes. He hit play. Jake, leave the bar early tonight. Just leave. Don't look back. He snatched his keys off the table and drove to Ethan's, a slow, icy fear creeping into his veins. By the time he got there, their friend Sam had already arrived, her face pale, eyes wide with the same fear Ethan and Jake had felt. She'd received a similar message, though hers was even stranger. A whisper of her own voice telling her to look under the manager's desk at their shared workplace. The small, windowless call center they all worked at part-time. All three stood in Ethan's living room, replaying their voicemails over and over again, their eyes darting towards the clock on the wall as it ticked closer to 6. Sam, nervously twisting her fingers, spoke up. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna look under the desk tomorrow. There has to be an explanation for this. Someone has to be messing with us. The next day they arrived at work. The same crowded and suffocating space with the stale smell of old coffee and the soft hum of phones that rarely stopped ringing. Sam approached the manager's desk cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan and Jake stood a few feet away, watching her. Her hand shook slightly as she knelt and pulled up the edge of the desk. There it was, a small old-fashioned autodialer, dusty and hidden, its blinking red light almost lost in the shadows. Jake leaned in, frowning. That shouldn't even be here. This place doesn't use stuff like that anymore. Sam bit her lip. So, someone left this here to prank us? Or... Her voice trailed off as she pulled out the device. It buzzed softly in her hand, wires tangled and frayed. She tried to turn it off, but her finger brushed a button and suddenly the screen lit up, showing a list of names: Ethan, Jake, Sam, and times. 6 p.m., 5:30 p.m., 7 p.m. Each timestamp matched perfectly with when they had received their calls. "What the hell?" Jake breathed, staring at the display. Suddenly, the lights in the call center flickered. The buzzing of the phones, the usual white noise of the office grew louder, almost overwhelming. Ethan's phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He pulled it out to see his own number once again on the screen. He glanced at Sam and Jake, fear evident in his eyes. He pressed play. "Ethan, they know! They're coming for you!" The air turned cold and a wave of nausea rolled through him. The voice on the phone, his voice, sounded desperate, almost like a cry for help. Before Ethan could react, Sam's phone started ringing too. She fumbled to answer it, her hands trembling. "Sam, get out! Get out now!" Jake turned towards the door, eyes wide, but it was as if something in the room shifted. The space between them and the door stretched, impossibly, unnaturally, as if the exit was suddenly a mile away. The flickering lights cast long shadows, and a strange sense of being watched settled into the room, heavy and suffocating. "What is happening?" Sam gasped, her voice cracking. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the door. "We have to move, now!" They stumbled through the office, the walls seeming to pulse around them, the buzzing growing louder, almost like whispers. Jake's phone rang as they reached the hallway, and against his better judgment, he answered it. "Jake, they're already here. It's too late." He turned, his breath catching in his throat. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, tall, shadowy, indistinct. It was as if the darkness itself had taken shape, watching them. The figure lifted a hand, pointing directly at Jake, and suddenly the hallway seemed to close in, the walls pressing closer, the air turning ice cold. Panic surged, and Jake shoved Ethan and Sam towards the emergency exit. They burst out into the snowy parking lot, the cold air hitting them like a shock. The world outside seemed normal, quiet, empty, the snow falling gently around them. But the feeling of dread lingered, the echoes of their own voices still ringing in their ears. They didn't stop running until they reached Ethan's car. They piled in, slamming the doors shut, their breaths fogging up the windows. Ethan's hands shook as he fumbled with the keys, the engine sputtering to life. He glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadowy figure emerging from the building. But there was nothing, just the empty parking lot, the falling snow. "What the hell was that?" Jake whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the heater. Sam clutched the autodialer in her hands, her knuckles white. "We have to destroy this. Whatever this is, it's tied to us. It's like it knows us, our fears, our thoughts. We can't let it keep going." Ethan nodded, his eyes locked on the road ahead. "We'll destroy it, and then we're getting as far away from here as possible." But even as he said it, a part of him knew it wasn't over. The voicemails, the shadow, the impossible way the hallway had stretched. It was like they had crossed a line, stumbled into something they could never fully escape. The autodialer was just the beginning, a symptom of something far bigger, something that had been waiting for them to notice it. And now that they had, it wasn't going to let them go easily. The next morning, Ethan's phone buzzed again, his own number. He stared at it, dread pooling in his stomach, his finger hovering over the screen. He didn't want to listen. He didn't want to know. But he knew he didn't have a choice. Not anymore.